Everybody hear me okay? Can't look at that yet. We're not there yet. Don't look. Okay. So, welcome to our Tuesday night Torah class. I'm glad you guys are all here. Yay, yay. So, let me open in a word of prayer. Father God, thank you for the day. Thanks for blessing us today and helping us to find time to come and study your word tonight. And I'd ask that you just bless our time together. We really just want to get to know you better, Father God. We want to learn your word. We want to make it a part of our lives so that we think about it always in everything we do. Just bless our conversation tonight and help us to learn from each other. In Yahushua's name, amen. Okay, so I always like to recap a little bit. We're moving along. Last week we reached what I consider to be a really nice dividing line. I always personally kind of struggle with the first 11 chapters of Genesis because there are definitely more questions than answers. You know, and so you work and you go away with a lot of different kind of opinions and then a lot of this feeling of, boy, I just don't know. You know, there's a whole lot of things I'm still thinking about. And I always use that to say, well, that gives me something to talk about when we get there. We can get the answers to some of those. But life starts completely different in chapter 12. Chapter 12 through the rest of the book of Genesis is just much different than those first 11 chapters. So I'm pleased to be here. So we're starting in chapter 12. And of course, the way I always do things, since we're starting in chapter 12, we'll go back to chapter 11 and read just the tail end of it. Verse 27 of chapter 11 says, this is the account of Terah. So I'm sure you guys all know this. Who's Terah? Abram's father, right? So let's see. I'll read this first little bit because it's just a little bit. I'm going to read the last part of chapter 11, starting in verse 27. It says, this is the account of Terah. Terah became, before I start, I always like to say, is there anything that we talked about last week? Is there anything that we talked about last week that you guys have been thinking about over the course of the week? And we can, last week we talked about the incident where Ham uncovered the nakedness of his father. We talked about the unknown stuff on that. We talked about the Tower of Babel. You can turn me up. I don't know. There you go. Boy, I feel up now. Yeah, okay. Yeah, okay. I was personally kind of getting into yelling, but that's all right. Anyway, did anybody have any thoughts about chapter 11, chapter 10 and 11, chapters 10 and 11? Okay, good. Then I was right to just be moving right along, right? Okay, chapter 11, verse 27. This is the account of Terah. Terah became the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran. And Haran became the father of Lot. While his father Terah was still alive, Haran died in Ur of the Chaldeans, in the land of his birth. Abram and Nahor both married. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife was Milcah. She was the daughter of Haran, the father of both Milcah and Iscah. Now Sarai was barren, she had no children. Terah took his son Abram, his grandson Lot, son of Haran, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, the wife of his son Abram, together they set out from Ur of the Chaldeans to go to Canaan. But when they came to Haran, they settled there. Terah lived 205 years, and he died in Haran. This is all kind of by way of backstory, but is it real clear what went on there? Where did they start off? Sure. So now we can turn this back on here. I like to go find these maps. So most people think that Ur is down here, kind of at the mouth. Here's the Euphrates River. Here's the Tigris River. They call this the Fertile Crescent. And so most people believe Ur is down here. It's in this area somewhere. These are the plains of Shinar. Remember we read about those? So that's all right in here. So Ur was down here, and this little faint blue dotted line shows the path that Abram, Terah, Sarai, and Lot would have taken in getting from Ur to Haran. Okay. There's a bunch of rabbinic teaching about the fact that Terah was in the business of manufacturing and selling idols. So there's a lot of stuff, speculation about what went on there, but none of it is in Scripture itself. So if somebody wants to talk about it, that's fine. But I wasn't going to talk about it.
So it's in the book of no, well, not the one I'm thinking of. Jasher.
Jasher, okay. There's one point of confusion, and it comes up right here. It says Terah had 3 sons, Abram, Nahor, and Haran. And then it goes on, and in verse 34, it was 31, it says, they set out from Ur of the Chaldeans to go to Canaan, but when they got to Haran, they settled down there. So what is this Haran? Is it a guy or is it a town? Right? The answer is both. It's both. As a matter of fact, I found this out today, and I found it was very interesting. As a matter of fact, they're completely different words. Not completely, but they're different words. Haran, as in Abram's brother, is spelled Hay-Resh Nun. Haran. H-R-N. Haran. Haran, the town, is spelled Hate-Resh Nun. So it's a different word. That one starts with an H and the other starts with a, if you will, a CH or a KH or something, depending on how you pronounce the hate. So one's Haran and the other's Haran. So I thought that was kind of interesting because I was always confused. Why did the guy in the town have the same name? Was there some important reason there? And from what I found out, no, there wasn't. But anyway, the distance from down here in Ur to up here in Haran is probably 400 or 500 miles. It's quite a ways. Maybe not that far, but it's certainly a couple hundred for sure. Because this is the Persian Gulf, and this is the Mediterranean Ocean. So Mediterranean Sea. So it's quite a ways. Now you see, in case you're not familiar with the geography, Haran is north of Damascus, and Damascus, of course, is north of Israel and Canaan. So is everybody? It's real nice to have this in your head. I've got another map in a minute, so I'm not done with maps. So let me see here. One of the questions, yeah, Mark? Just a second, got to wait for the microphone.
So according to maps, it says to walk 500 miles is a 5-day journey.
5 days? Man, I always figured 20 miles was as much as you could do.
That's probably nonstop.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I remember I was always told a 20-mile walk would be a pretty much of a day. But in any case, it was a long ways. So one of the questions that comes up a lot is, so why did they go from Ur to Haran? Was it in Ur that God met Abram and said, leave your country and go to the place I'll show you? Or was it in Haran? So in order to help decide that, there's a good place to go look. I was trying to get you guys to kind of know. There's 2 or 3 things you know. Like, you really need to know about the 11th chapter of Hebrews, the Hall of Faith. It's just nice to know where that is. But the other one is the 7th chapter of Acts. The 7th chapter of Acts is the testimony of Stephen before he was brought before the Sanhedrin, and they were busy persecuting Christians for their heresies, and Stephen was one of the first ones that was stoned. And so if you want a kind of a nutshell, 2-page history of what's happened to of all of Genesis, go to Acts chapter 7. And let's go do that. Acts chapter 7. So if you read in chapter 6, Stephen's been brought before the Sanhedrin. In chapter 7 begins, it says, Then the high priest asked him, Are these charges true? And so it starts in verse 2. It says, To this he replied, Brothers and fathers, listen to me. The God of glory appeared to our father Abraham while he was still in Mesopotamia, before he lived in Haran. Leave your country and your people, God said, and go to the land that I will show you. So he left the Chaldeans. Yes? Yeah.
What was that?
It says they went from Ur to Haran to Egypt.
Yes.
They went right past Damascus, but it looks like they went right through it. So wouldn't it say on the top Damascus too?
Well, yes, but they didn't stop there. As a matter of fact, it's not mentioned in the story, but yet there it is, and they probably went through it. You're right. Good question. Anyway, so this seems to indicate that at the time of Stephen, which was, like 2,000 years before the events that we're just reading about, it was their understanding that Abram was in Ur when he got the call from God to leave his country and to go to a land he would show him. And I think that's fascinating for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's nice to kind of know what really happened. But secondly, that's 2,000 years. I mean, 2,000 years from the event we're reading to this guy talking about it, and then 2,000 years from this guy talking about it to today. That's, to me, I just think that's kind of cool. It makes you wonder if God didn't make this stuff all hang together, somebody did, because, it all fits. It's all very consistent. Anyway, that's what I want to talk about there. So, moving right along. Any questions?
So
Yes.
it's been so long, we probably shouldn't just toss it aside like it doesn't mean anything as far as defining how we live our life and things like that, right?
You mean the Bible?
Yeah, the 4,000
Yeah,
years.
that's my point. Yeah. Yeah.
Might want to hang on to it,
You
kind
might
of
wanna-
remember
yeah,
it,
yeah.
apply the principles.
Well, the other thing is you might want to look at it yourself and not rely on what somebody told you.
That works.
When they crossed the Nile River, isn't it called?
Yep.
The Mount Sinai, if you just look at it, already know that it's actually really far away, and it's not just a small place.
Yeah, that's right.
So when Abraham must have had to, wasn't it Abraham or Jacob? I can't remember.
It's Abram.
Yeah, Abraham went to Mount Sinai. So he must have had to walk a pretty long way.
Okay. Yep. We'll get to that. Hey, stick with us, and we'll get there. Does anybody else have any comment? Paul.
So just looking at the map, one might ask, why not go across the desert? So are these trade routes that they would travel on?
Yes, they are. There's lots of reasons. First of all, one of the things that's always fascinated me about this story is God did not say, go to Canaan. What he said was, go to a land I will show you, right? So Abram didn't know where he was going. That's one reason. Another reason is to go this way crosses some of the harshest and most desolate land on earth. And it was a much, much more difficult trek than to go up this fertile plain watered by these rivers and through these mountains here. So that's the other reason. So that's the way, that blue road there is the way most people would have done it.
Yeah. Plus you got that guy
Yeah, you got the
guarding
guy
the
in the
desert.
way.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's part of the issue there too. No? Okay. Does somebody want to read chapter 12 from the beginning through verse 9? First 9 verses of chapter 12.
And Yahweh said to Abram, Go yourself out of your land and your relatives and from your father's house to a land which I show you. And I shall make you a great nation and barak you and make your name great, and you shall be a baraka. And I shall barak those who barak you, and curse him who curses you. And in you all the clans of the earth shall be barak. So Abraham left as Yahweh had commanded him, and Lot went with him, and Abraham was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. And Abraham took Sarai his wife, and Lot his brother's son, and all of their possessions that they had gathered, and the beings whom they had acquired in Haran, and they departed from the land of Canaan, and they came to the land of Canaan. And Abraham passed through the land as the place of Shechem, as far as the terebinth tree of Moreh. At the time the Canaanites were in the land. And Yahweh appeared to Abraham and said, To your seed I give this land. And he built there an altar to Yahweh who had appeared to him. And from there he moved to the mountain east of Bethel.
Bethel.
And he pitched his tent with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. And he built there an altar to Yahweh and called on the name of Yahweh. And Abraham departed, continuing toward the Negev.
Okay, that's fine. Couple things. So, beginning in chapter 12, it says, Yahweh said to Abram, Leave your country, your people, and your father's household, and go to the land I will show you. This is why I made a big point of what it says in Acts. Because if you go back up and read the last couple of sentences in chapter 11, it clearly says that they set out from Ur of the Chaldees to go to Canaan. But when they came to Haran, they settled there. Terah lived 205 years and died in Haran. So I just think it's important that you get the picture here. What was it? Nahor didn't go, right? Nahor stayed back. Nahor stayed in Ur. But Terah, Abram, Sarai, and Lot, and then all their household left. And they left from Ur, and they got as far as Haran, and then they stopped. And they stayed in Haran until what happened? What? Terah died, exactly, I'm sorry. Yeah, and when Terah died is when the first sentence in chapter 12 occurs. Yahweh said to Abram, Leave your country, your people, and your father's household, and go to the land I will show you. So his father went with him as far as Haran. His father died, and then God said, okay, now we can go where I really wanted you to go. That's the way I interpret that. So, any thoughts about that? John?
Well, I was going to ask you, is it that he doesn't have the influence that his father has on him as much as, or?
I don't know. I've often thought about that. One of the things I thought was that his father's an old man, and it probably wouldn't have been a good thing for him to just say, well, see you, Dad, I'm heading out. So maybe part of it was just the family thing that goes along with it. Maybe part of it was that because his dad clearly wasn't part of the promise, wasn't part of the commitment that God made it to Abram, not to Terah.
Right.
So, I don't know, lots of different thoughts there.
Well, and the background story, like you mentioned earlier, Jasser, he was a bigwig in
a not good way.
Right.
Yeah,
In-
he was
in what?
as in making and selling idols.
Terah, yeah, he was like the viceroy of
Yeah. And so-
Nimrod.
Oh, you said Nahor didn't go, right?
Yes.
Oh, well, later in the story, don't think Nahor's living in Padan Aram.
Yep.
So at one point he must have gone there.
That's a good point. That's a very good point. Yeah, but it definitely says that he didn't go this time, doesn't it? I'm just reading what it says. Beg your pardon?
Say one way or the other.
Well, yeah, but it says
He's not included in the group.
It says, Terah took his son Abram, his grandson Lot of Haran, and the daughter-in-law Sarai, and the wife of his son Abram, and together they set out from Ur of the Chaldees. So are you saying he could have been included but not named?
I don't know.
I don't know. It's a possibility. Certainly I'm not going to the mat on that one.
One simple question.
Uh-oh.
So was his home, right?
That's where he was, that's where the story picks up. Yes.
That's where he lives.
That's probably where he was born.
Okay. So Haran was where he lives? Like,
Yeah,
was
they
it Ur?
moved. They moved from Ur to Haran.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And part of that backstory is they got in trouble because Abram was around busy telling everybody, you guys got to quit this idol worship because I know who the real God is and it's none of this stuff.
Exactly.
And so they threw him out. So that's the backstory. That's not for sure true, but fits. It fits. Okay, let's read again this, or at least I'm going to say again, the thing that you read through in the verses 2 and 3 of chapter 12, because your Bible uses the word brakah, and in case you don't know, brakah is bless, right? So it says, I will start with verse 2. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse, and all the peoples on earth will be blessed through you. That, someone pointed that out to me way back a long time ago. If you had to write or identify the key verse in the entire Bible, it's that one. That's the whole reason for what happens for the rest of the story, the rest of the book, is those two verses right there. We can talk about that for a minute. John.
This is one of my pet peeves from
Uh-huh.
from Brother Judah.
Okay?
They'll say, and he was the first Jew.
Yes. Yes.
God, that grinds me.
Yep, yep. The
First
term
of all-
Jew hadn't even been invented yet.
That's
Judah
like-
wasn't born.
That's 4 generations away. Why don't
Yeah.
you say he's the first
Hebrew.
Edomite?
There you go.
He's
First
closer.
Yep. Yeah.
Well, it's the same pattern that happens later on. It's like, well, the Jews crossed
Yes.
the Red Sea, and the Jews went to Mount Sinai. It
Yeah.
wasn't the Jews. It was Israel. It was all the tribes of Israel
Yes.
and the mixed multitude.
Yes, and that's probably one of the most pervasive mistruths
Well, there's
that we've been told by the church.
Well, in this case, it's a lot of Christian types and ministries who say we have a special place in our heart for the Jews.
Yes.
So they'll say, well, if you'll be blessed, if you bless the Jews, because Abraham was the first Jew,
Yeah,
and if you bless him, it's a ricochet blessing back to you.
yeah,
You can't lose.
yeah, yeah.
It's like that's not what the story says.
No,
why
that's not
why
what
are
the
you
story
doing that?
says. Yeah, I agree with you. When you think about it, though, given that we, being the totally open-minded people that we are, given that we think we now understand what's going on there, it's amazing that God knew that they had it wrong, and he knew they had it wrong for, these 2,000 some odd years, and he says, that's okay, I can still make this work. He says, I'm going to get people to come around to my way of thinking at the very end here.
Well, it's kind of a benign argument that I make, and it's not like there's plenty of other worse things to argue about.
Yeah.
But it's not honest, and you're not.
Yep.
You're not. It's, if your takeaway is be good to people who take the God of Abraham seriously, well, that's not a bad thing.
No.
But if it's excluding you from actually being one of those,
Yeah.
because your theology says so, then that's not good.
Yeah, there's all kinds. Of all people, Paul said all kinds of things that, if you believe in Yeshua, then you are of the seed of Abraham. So this definitely includes us, right? Polly.
So I just have a question. So then at the end of chapter 11, he's already left Ur and he's been dwelling, Abram has been dwelling in Haran.
Yep.
Okay. So where is it when he says, get out of your country from your family? Is he referring to Haran as get out of your country
Well,
from your family?
that's kind of what I'm thinking, but that kind of goes against what we read in the book of Acts. Because the book of Acts kind of implies God said that to him when he was in Ur. I don't know. I can take it both ways. one of the things we're going to discover here is that we'll be looking at the times God really gets into Abraham and others' lives, and we'll find that the distances between, the times between when he does that, 10, 20, 30 years sometimes, you know? So God could have told him this in Ur, and he could have told it to him again in Haran, and that probably was, you know, many years.
However, he does say, and from your father's house, and it appears he was still with his father
In Haran.
in Haran.
That's true. That's true. So again, I don't think, luckily that's not a salvation issue, but it's interesting to look at. Margaret.
Yeah, just to comment on what John said, I think the Jews they're the only identifiable group that's left that can say and trace back their ancestry to Abraham.
Theoretically.
Abraham, well, the Jews, Benjamin, and the priests.
Judah, yeah.
Yeah. So, in a way, it's like they're the identifiable one. It wasn't until lately when people have started saying, well, okay, you know, maybe these tribes are up here and up there where they were
Yeah, but
sent off to. So
I hear what you're saying,
Yeah.
but one of the struggles I have with that, and this will come up again in a few minutes, but is that Jews aren't horribly identifiable. I mean, there's blonde-head, blue-eyed Jews. There's dark-skinned Jews. You know, you can't. If you go up to a person and say, "Man, that person's definitely Jewish," I figure you stand about a 50-50 chance of being wrong.
yeah.
Now, that as opposed to, for example, someone that's black. That person's pretty easy to identify, right? But a Jew is a difficult thing to identify, and they've been trying for years to get rid of them, and they've not been successful. You know, so, and you'd think, given that they blend in with everybody else, they would have been, you know, there's no reason for the term Jews to even exist anymore, except that God wants it to.
Well, I would say identifiable in that those that keep, because now you have the Jews by ancestry, but really they don't keep any of Torah.
Well, that's what I was going to say. The other thing about,
it's like, you know,
if you're Jewish these days, you're Jewish by essentially decision.
Yeah.
You know, you've decided to be. Now, you may have decided to be and converted, or you may have decided to be because your parents were, and they may have decided to be because their parents were, or maybe their parents converted. You don't know. You know, and I don't think their pedigree, the guarantee that they are truly from the tribe of Judah or Benjamin is much better than ours, really. That's just my opinion.
Can I just,
Yeah.
I wasn't trying to say that Jews don't have a heritage, a link back to Abraham. I accept that.
Sure.
It's that saying it the way they say it that nobody else does.
Yes.
And that's not at all what it says in the scripture.
Well, like I say, Paul says once you've identified as a believer in Messiah, you're of the seed of Abraham.
And I'm also not just criticizing the rabbinic Judaism, because Christianity does the same thing. They go right along with it. Yeah, we don't want nothing to do with that Old Testament stuff, that old Torah stuff.
Yeah. Yep. What?
I don't know how to ask the question, but it has to do with the fact that it seems like Abraham's other son, Ishmael, would also fit into the category because he was Abraham's seed and to be blessed. So any of them that choose to bless Abraham and his beliefs and follow his ways equally.
I tell you what I finally came to the conclusion of after looking at that. And then there's a really nice chapter in Isaiah, I think it's like 57 or 59, that talks about the fact that, basically I summarize it this way: God is really a proponent of adoption. And it even says that he values those that have asked to be adopted into the family more than those that are naturally born. because those that have asked to be adopted in know what they're getting into and want to. Those that were born into it may not even know what they're doing, you know. So I guess my point is all of this hereditary stuff is really trumped by what you believe in your heart, and that's essentially what most of the New Testament says, you know. Yes.
The Nile River, didn't two
Go for it. Yes.
Didn't two groups of Israelites or Jews pass it? Wasn't there two groups?
Well,
There's
we're going to discover that several different members of Abraham's family went, including Abraham himself, went to the Nile River, went to Egypt.
Yeah, because I can remember, wasn't Jacob one of them who crossed it?
Yep.
And then there's Abraham. And if you look by the Egypt sign, you can see a little trail. Isn't that where they like crossed or something?
You mean
See, right by the pyramid?
Right.
Keep going. No, not the blue line.
over here?
Yeah. If you keep going down.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
the little line. Wasn't that where they go?
Crossing the Nile River is no big deal.
I
mean,
didn't say.
it's not that.
I know. I'm saying when they went down the path, isn't that the path where they went? I'm just saying,
Yeah.
is that the path?
Yeah, if you stick with it, we'll get there. Anything else? Okay, I wanted to explore the promise for a little bit because it's really key. And it basically says, I'll make you into a great nation. Has God done that? You don't think so? I will. Okay, at this time he has not done that. But 4,000 years later, I mean, a great nation it's a term of judgment. But one of the things, I wish I meant to find it and I didn't. Have you ever seen the ratio of the number of Jews to the world population and then the number of Jews to the total winners of Nobel Prizes? It turns out that Jews represent less than 1% of the world's population, and they represent like 20 to 25% of those that have won Nobel Prizes. Quite noble of them, that's true. But I guess the point being is God's blessed them. He really has. And we've been blessed by them. Yeah? Yes?
Oh, were you done, or?
No. I mean, yes.
Well, I do want to talk about the blessing. And it says, the way I read it, I'm not going to bless you directly. At least that's not what it says here. It's got this ricochet blessing concept. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who curse you. So what other people do to you is going to reflect on the fact that you have a relationship with me. But it doesn't say directly, I'm just going to bless you because I'm going to want to bless you.
Yeah.
Which encourages, I would say, for the descendants to interact with the nations, you know, like the priest. The priests actually benefit. They get paid when the tribes pay the Levites.
Yeah.
So I don't know. That's how I'm looking at it.
No, I think that's fair. That's just fine.
So stepping back a little bit, chapter 11, where when they were trying to build the Tower of Babel so that they can make a great
Name for themselves,
Name
yes.
for themselves. And so here it is in chapter 12, God tells Abram, and make your name great.
Make your name great.
So one's going to be done, you know, man tries to make a great name, and then when God makes a name great, completely different outcome. Further down, I can't wait to talk about the blessings, though, and how that might look.
Talk about what?
The blessings.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, because I don't know if it's correct, but I have a thought on some of that. But
Okay, well, you can talk about it now if you want to, or no?
no, it's
Okay.
premature.
Okay. I appreciate that. People are forever stealing my thunder, you know? Yeah.
Speaking of making him a great nation, perhaps our thinking is distorted As great could just mean distinguished or God dwelt or intensity or a lot of other things besides extreme numbers.
Yeah, yeah, that's a
So
good
he's
point.
already a great nation in Haran long before he
Yeah, that's a good point.
couldn't count them because, like the sand of the sea.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. It's also, I remember, there's a place somewhere, maybe it's in Deuteronomy, where God says, if you'll obey the Torah, if you'll obey my rules, you'll become a great nation. And then the nations around you will look at you and they will say, how has this nation become great? Their God must be truly a great God, which kind of tells you, what, if you will, God's hidden agenda is here. So, and honestly and truly, it's fair to say the Jews, but it's also fair to look at ourselves and say, that's what our job is, right? Our job is to make God look good. And the way we make God look good is by being obedient to his Torah so that other people, are blessed. Yes.
Oh, I've been in this discussion with people before about America.
Yeah.
And my view is that God has blessed America and other countries because we were founded on Christian Judeo principles.
Yep.
And I've actually got an argument with somebody recently about how America has been the prime in the world, the prime, what's the word I'm looking for? Ally of modern day Israel.
Yes.
Like
Oh,
our
yeah, absolutely.
country, and you look at like what's happened in history, we've allowed religious freedom. That included the Jewish religion.
Yep.
So Jewish people have been allowed to come to this country, practice their religion, and there's always, you could say America's whatever you say about it, you can't deny that we've been a truly blessed nation.
Yep.
And, unfortunately, we're seeing the reverse happen now, same as in ancient Israel, where as a society, we're turning away from God, and the blessings are little by little just leaving us. But I've always maintained that, because even, now, you see, love them or hate them, Trump is supporting Israel, and he's the first president that, in modern times who's taken the initiative to move,
Yeah.
we see him move the capital to Jerusalem. Well,
Yeah.
not move the capital, but the
But
embassy.
the embassy.
I think that it's always been their capital since they took it
Since
over,
they-
right?
Yeah, since they were, at first it
Since
was Tel Aviv.
67 or so.
But whenever they took it over
when
67, they made it their capital.
Six-Day War. But I don't,
No, I
my
agree.
view is that we are a great nation, and in a lot of ways, maybe we are that great nation
Yep.
that he's talking about.
I wouldn't disagree with that. There's a couple things that I agree with you 100%. I think like that myself. Do you know, I don't mean to get political about this, but the fact that Trump moved the embassy, presidents for the past 20, 30 years have been promising to do that, and they always found one reason or another not to. He was the first guy that actually did it. Do you know the last time somebody actually did something like that? Harry Truman. Harry Truman did that. And so these obscure presidents come up and do something like that, and you got to realize, or at least I kind of think, God's got a whole different news media than we do. And so the stuff that happens that's important to him, we may not think is real important. But, I'm convinced that, that was a big deal. Yep.
His Twitter timeline is different than everybody.
Anyway, I'm agreeing with you. But, and those...
Can I just?
go ahead.
It wasn't even that controversial thing. Congress passed to do this a long time
yeah,
ago.
no
But that they did
kidding.
it was like, oh my God, the earth is going to stop.
That was the typical politician. They'll say, oh, yes, I'll do that, and then they never do, right? And Trump says, oh, yes, I'll do that. And did it, my gosh. I apologize. That was definite rabbit trail. But it says right in the verse 3 or 4, no, 3, I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse, and all the peoples on earth will be blessed through you. Now, that's really the key there. And you can see that happening in many, many different ways, not the least of which is the advent of Yeshua, right? Any other thoughts, John, anybody?
What does it say? And I'll be blessed through you.
It says, the last half of verse 3, all the peoples on earth will be blessed through you.
Oh, in thee shall be. Well, King James says, in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed. Okay.
Okay, I agree with that. It says the same thing. Margaret had something.
I've got a couple of things. When I went to Israel in 1997, there were two countries, Costa Rica and Honduras, I think, that had their embassies in Jerusalem, acknowledged and recognized.
Who other countries?
I think it was Costa Rica and Honduras.
Costa Rica, I remember.
Small countries.
Yes.
Very
yes.
small countries,
Yep.
but they took a step. And I guess now there's a couple more that, I think it was Guatemala and I don't know what the other country was, that are now doing the same, following the same. But you have to remember that other presidents didn't do it because there were 60 people that died in the protests that they had, the rock throwing over in the Gaza.
Yeah.
So not only that, but I think there's more, like Pastor Mark said, there's going to be more that's going to come up because of this action.
Yeah.
And so we're not seeing, the total end of it.
Yeah, but
It's leading up to, I think, a lot of things that are going to be coming up.
there's a bunch of stuff that has to
Yeah.
happen, and this is on the road to that.
Yeah.
That's true.
In the establishing of the temple, I mean, you're talking. There's a lot of things that are going to happen.
Yeah, if we thought they were mad before.
Yeah. And the other thing is, I don't know if anyone here has read Armstrong's book about Britain and the United States and how he kind of identified the blessings, a lot of the blessings that the tribes got as being people in Britain and the United States.
Yeah. Yeah. And you can make a
just
case for
taking-
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, you certainly can. But I think it's almost just as easy to make a case for the fact that those countries have a greater percentage of believers in the God of Abraham,
Yeah.
Isaac, and Jacob.
Right.
And so it's which came first, the chicken or the egg kind of a deal.
Yeah.
Yeah. You got it. Okay. Don't forget those people over there.
So we just had Noah and the flood not too
Yep.
many verses ago, where the earth was cleansed. Now we're maybe 9 generations to Abram, and we already have adultery or idolatry that is rampant again, and the Father's having to choose somebody out of all of this to begin again with
Yep.
calling somebody to come out. And I believe it was only 5 generations that the Tower of Babel had already been erected from
Yep.
the flood.
Yep.
So it's very interesting how in a short amount of time, sin was still,
Yep.
or disobedience or rebellion, whatever you want to look at it, was
Yep.
still very rampant.
Oh, yeah. Sometimes I think about that in reference to just my own life. I mean, because we can see it in our own society. I mean, left to our own devices, mankind goes down. Doesn't improve.
A race to the bottom.
A race to the bottom. Anybody else? Okay. Let's finish the passage before we get through here. So how old was Abraham whenever he left Haran? 75, yeah. So he traveled as far as the great tree of Moreh at Shechem. So he left Haran here. Terah dies, so he takes Lot and Sarai, and they head off down this way, and they go through Damascus, as Elijah pointed out, and then they come down here, and I've got another picture where it blows that up a little bit. So they come down here through Damascus. This is the Sea of Galilee here, so they probably came through this way, and came down here, and here's Shechem, here's Bethel. Now, Jerusalem wasn't called Jerusalem at the time, but anyway, those cities sit on the western foothills of this little low kind of a mountain range here. So that's where he left. He left Haran, which is just off the map up here, and came down here, crossed over there, and came down like that. John.
Just for what it's worth, the King James, which is, of course, the Bible that he had with him,
Yes.
never mentions any tree.
Beg your
It just
pardon?
says the land.
Okay, it doesn't
under
say the
piece
tree,
of-
huh?
Yeah, Abraham passed through the land unto the place of Shechem.
No.
Verse 6 you're talking about.
Yes, I sure am. Isn't that interesting? I'm surprised at that. So, Shechem. Can anybody tell me what Shechem looks like today? Well, there's a hill on each side.
There's
yes.
a good side and a bad side.
Yep, there's Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal, but there is a town down there where Shechem used to be. You could call it Shechem, although I'm sure that sometime over these last 4,000 years, it was probably obliterated, maybe more than once. But the name of that town today is Nablus, and it's a Palestinian-controlled town. It's in what they call the West Bank, so it's in part of the Palestinian territory. But we've been to the Oaks of Moreh, haven't we? Where you can stand up there and I even sat there under that very oak tree, I'm sure. 4,000-year-old oak tree. Anyway. Traveled through the land as far as the site of the great tree. That time the Canaanites were in the land. Yahweh appeared to Abram and said, "To your offspring I'll give this land." So he built an altar there to Yahweh and who had appeared to him. So regardless of, let's see, you can do this one of two ways. You can say to yourself that, Abram must have had a really, really close walking, working, talking relationship with God. Or you can say that, well, maybe he only talked to God the times it says that he did. In which case, he went a long time between hearing from God. And we're going to find out more about that. But I guess, anyway, obviously, when God said to him, I'm going to give this land to your offspring, it was a big thing to him. So he built an altar. It says from there he went on toward the hills east of Bethel and pitched his tent, with Bethel on the west and Ai on the right, on the east. He built an altar there and called the name of the Lord. And Abram set out and continued toward the Negev. Does anyone know what the word Negev means in Hebrew?
It means Numbers, the book of Numbers.
No, Negev, south. It just means south. So he went on south. That's all that really says.
Well, no, that's Midbar, I'm sorry. Question.
Yes.
So the altar, as I understand it, it's a marking that this is God's claim to the land.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, that's good.
I think that's right.
You said he built an altar, right?
Yep.
Is there any is there any trace of that altar anywhere? Is it back in Jerusalem, or do people even know where it is?
Nope. Now that's a very interesting question. Whether or not that very altar exists, I don't know the answer to that question. But if he did build such an altar, do you know what it would have looked like? Do you know what it would have looked like?
I can't really remember.
Well,
I know
what I'm
it was
fishing-
gold. Wasn't it gold though?
No. What I'm fishing toward, typically, he doesn't like it when, I shouldn't say he doesn't like it. Typically, it needs to be made out of natural stones, not cut stones, and they just need to be piled up. And the function of the altar is to provide a place to set the wood, to start the fire, to put the animal on that you're going to sacrifice, okay? So it's not a great big deal. It's not an ornate thing. It would look like, to people coming in hundreds of years later, just a pile of stones is probably what it would look like. So whether or not it's still there, I can't say for sure. But don't know. The place is certainly there. You can go identify within, I don't know, a few square miles of where it had to be. So, John,
Yeah, I just had, that's the only question I had.
well, that's fine. You can have others. Polly's got something.
There's not a list? There's not a...
Oh, you've used all your questions, sorry.
Rats. Isn't there an altar on Ebal or with the other one?
Well, there might be. I'm not sure. Mark,
It's on Gerizim.
Gerizim.
Mount Gerizim.
So is this the second time we've seen an altar built? Is Noah's altar the first that we've
Yes.
read about anyway?
Yes, that we've read about.
And then this would be the second we've read about, but he's built two here, right?
It kind of says it twice, doesn't it? I hadn't really
Seems
thought
like
about
the
that.
first one he built, in verse 7, it says the Lord appeared to him there.
Yes,
And at the second altar, it says he called on the name of the Lord. So
yeah.
we haven't.
Well, Abel made a sacrifice, so it's implied that maybe there was an altar there. I don't know.
Well, yeah, that's a good point. And not only that, but I guess the other point about that whole thing is this whole thing of building altars and how they would have done it and how they would have looked evidently had been taught to the way back in the beginning. But I do know that he says, when you build me an altar, build it with undressed stones, which means stones that aren't cut. So it wouldn't have looked like some big ornate, thing. Any other thoughts? Okay. You want to go on? All right. Somebody want to read the rest of chapter 12? It's from verse 10 down to the end of the chapter. We're going to give somebody else a chance.
Starting in 10.
Yeah.
And a scarcity of food came to be in the land, and Abram went down to Mitzrayim to dwell there, for the scarcity of food was severe in the land. And it came to be, when he was close to entering Mitzrayim, that he said to Sarai his wife, "See, I know that you are a beautiful woman to look at, and it shall be, when the Mitzrites see you, that they shall say, 'This is his wife,' and they shall kill me, but let you live. Please say you are my sister, so that it shall be well for me for your sake, and my life be spared because of you." And it came to be, when Abram came to Mitzrayim, and the Mitzrites saw the woman, that she was very beautiful. And Pharaoh's officials saw her and praised her before Pharaoh, and the woman was taken to Pharaoh's house. And he treated Abram well for her sake. And he had sheep and cattle and male donkeys and male and female servants and female donkeys and camels. But Yahweh plagued Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. And Pharaoh called Abram and said, "What is this you have done to me? Why did you not inform me that she was your wife? Why did you say, 'She is my sister'? And so I was going to take her for my wife. Look, here is your wife. Take her and go." And Pharaoh commanded his men concerning him, and they sent him away with his wife and all that he had.
Okay. This is the answer to your question. See, this is them going down from here on down over to Egypt. Okay. One of the things that this story kind of represents to me, that has always fascinated me about the Bible, is, man, it's only, 2 little paragraphs here. 10 verses, not even that. Yeah, 10 verses. And what a story. All kinds of stuff happened in 10 verses. Now, granted, there's a bunch of questions, but you get the main idea of what happened, So let's talk about it for a minute. First of all, there's a famine in the land, and Abram went down to Egypt to live there for a while because of the famine. So is there any indication that God told him to do that?
No.
What do you think? You think God told him to do that? Or do you think he decided, whoa, if I stay here, I'll starve?
I think Abraham waited for Yahweh to tell him what to do because he wouldn't disobey Yahweh.
Okay, that's fine. That's a perfectly good opinion.
I think this kind of shows mercy, grace, and long suffering on a number of different levels. Okay? Because one, he already told him that, I will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. So if he had Yah's blessing, you kind of, what do you do? It's kind of like us today. We're waiting on a word. We don't know whether we should go left or we should go right. We don't have clear direction, so we proceed anyway.
Yep.
So he proceeds anyway, and he goes down, and he says, hey, wait a minute now, okay. Let me figure this out. And let's do this and let's do that. So they do it. They get a blessing because of it. And, I think it was allowed, but it wasn't commanded as much.
So it was, some people I've heard them, I don't know that I go along with this, but it was God's permissive will, but not his perfect will. There you go, thank you.
I would ask what the definition of that is.
Well, I would too.
Permissive will.
But I've heard that before.
I think we all have free will to make choices.
Yes.
Yeah.
But
and-
it's one thing to say, I know you want me to do this, but I'm going to go do that. It's another thing to say, I can't tell what you want me to do. And so if anything, I'd give him that position of saying, I can't tell what you want me to do.
Yeah. So, in a moment of panic or fear or whatever, he decides he's going to go to Egypt. He hears they got plenty of food there, but you're beautiful, let's do this.
Well, we're going to talk about that in a minute. Yeah. Marvin's got something.
A subsection of this story where he is scared for his life.
Yep.
I mean, if not too long ago he was told he would make a great nation of his offspring.
Yep.
Well, at this point in time, he doesn't have any.
Yep.
And so did he lose sight of the fact that God wasn't going to look out for him?
Evidently. I mean, I would think so.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
I think that's interesting.
I do too.
Oh, you had mentioned that how often God actually spoke to him, because it was like 20, 30
Well,
years.
There's a
between-
long time between things in the Bible that
Yeah.
says God said something to him.
So this seems to be like soon after they arrived in the land,
Yeah,
after he received the first blessing.
yeah. And the first
So he
commitment, promise,
maybe,
whatever.
he was trying to beseech God, his will, and God just wasn't appearing to him.
Yeah, I don't know.
So, yeah, like Paul was saying, maybe it's permissible, and not that big of a deal, really.
Yeah.
He got
Let-
blessed in the
let me-
end, even though he tried to pull the wool over Pharaoh's eyes. But
Yeah. Well, I want to talk about that as a separate issue. But one of the things in my life, a lot of times I don't know what he wants. I mean, it's real clear that he doesn't want me to steal this car, or he does. There's a lot of things that are real clear. But in terms of, I can't see any particular good reason to go this way or to go that way. I don't know. I kind of feel like a lot of it comes with, you get to pick. You go ahead. And what he's basically saying, now I may be making this up wrongly, but he says, I'll work with you either way. Both of these paths will work for me. So you get to pick. Yeah. John?
Can I point out a standalone olive top? There's only one in this chapter.
Really? Where?
It's where he says, call me, verse 13, say, I pray thee, thou art you, that's the standalone olive top, that I may, my sister.
Okay. That you say you are my sister. That's interesting.
Well, it's interesting because you have concubines, and then you have the as Mark points out, the olive and tav wife, the covenant wife,
Yes.
that has the et in it,
Yes.
the olive tav.
Yeah.
So I just think that's interesting. There's also,
Go ahead.
well, there's a lot of parallels here. He talks about that you will kill me, or that they will, well, maybe that's kind of a stretch. I was thinking of when God said, when he goes early on with Moses' life,
Yeah.
I'm here to kill you or your son, by the way,
Yeah.
with the story of Gershom.
Yep, I know what you're talking about.
So I don't know, it's kind of interesting how the word.
Well, I've got a better one to talk about with respect to that.
And that's just going down to
Yeah.
Egypt.
Let's talk about that. Why would Abram say to Sarai, "You're pretty good looking, so to keep men from killing me so that they can have you, let me introduce you as my sister." And Sarah, being the good wife, she says, "Okay, fine." Right? Boy, that's a funny thing. How on earth is that going to make him in a better position in terms of not getting killed?
Well, it seems like as a sister that she would have value.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
As a beautiful woman, she would have value.
Certainly, well, yeah. But
And
why?
so it could be something that he could trade.
Yes, yes.
It would be chattel, pretty much.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of the reason we don't understand this has to do with the fact that women, in the relationship that women had with their husbands was complicated, and they were very much, as you say, chattel. Yeah. Paul.
Well, also understanding the culture. A lot of the Near East culture is if you want to take someone as a wife, you bless the male or the family because he
Yes.
wasn't the father.
Yes.
So you would pay a dowry
Yes.
fee or something like that, whether it would be cattle, land, or whatever.
Yeah.
So he would be able to benefit from that. Where
Yeah.
if he goes in and he's the husband, there is no
Yeah,
dowry
they just
that's
get
gonna
rid of
be
him
paid.
right away
Get rid of
because
him
he's
and-
just in the way.
But and if that was the culture that he thought he might be exposed to, because he left the land of the Chaldeans.
Yeah.
And that may have been some of the problems that were in that land, is
Well-
that men would take, and you've heard the story, that they would take whatever women that they chose.
Sure.
He would have heard those stories
Sure.
from his ancestors. So.
Well, there's that, and then one of the things that dawned on me as I was looking at this again today was, the Egyptian society had a big deal with, especially in the royalty of brothers marrying their sisters. I don't know how that factors in there, but that might have been part of his thinking. Don't know.
So his wife was from Ur as well, correct? He
Yes,
met her
yes,
there, and
yes.
he brought her from Ur, Sarai. I was looking at some of the historical notes in the Bible that I have, and it records that one of the traditions or customs of Haran was to, I don't understand this, but adopt your wife as a sister.
Yes.
Because there were privileges of inheritance and other things that you could get by doing that. And Abram, just coming from Haran, this was something that he was very familiar with.
Yes, I read that too. And I wasn't quite sure what to make of that, but it certainly could be. One of the things that led me to believe was that the whole culture had this relationship, this wife-sister thing, in various different facets running throughout things, and we've probably lost sight of that. We've lost how that really worked. Yeah.
Isn't it talked about somewhere, and I can't remember, maybe it's the Apocrypha, where Sarah was in fact like a cousin,
Yes.
which
It was.
in Scripture is usually referred to as a sister. I know even,
Yeah.
I know even in Spanish, even my grandmother used to say primo hermano. They would say it's like a brother.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
A
No,
cousin is a brother.
That definitely fits, and it is true that it's rabbinic tradition more than anything else that Sarah was his niece, not his sister, but his niece. And there is actually a place where it says that Sarah is the daughter of my father, but not of my mother. So, I don't know what to think about all of that. But let me tell you one of the things I read that I thought was kind of fascinating. First of all, when I first read this as a new believer and everything, I read this and I thought, what is up with that? Why on earth would you want to introduce your wife as your sister, and how in the world would that protect you? And I got to say, I still don't really get that. But one of the things that I was reading about this that I thought was kind of interesting, this happens in the book of Genesis 3 times. This is the first time Abram does it, but he does it again, and then his son Isaac does it. All 3 of them have to do with them introducing their wife as their sister out of a motivation of fear. But the thing I read, which I thought was interesting, the Bible does this sometimes. We can identify other stories like this too. And what it's inviting you to do is to take all three of them and look at them together and look at what's different. If you look at what's different about each of those stories, maybe you can kind of get what God's trying to tell you out of that. We're not going to do that now because this is just the first one. But when we get to the third one, which won't be that far away, we'll come back and compare the three stories of how these guys introduced their wives as their sisters and see if we can learn anything from that. I thought that might be an interesting thing. Yes, sir.
Just one simple question again.
Oh, just one small one. Okay.
Memphis, right there on the map,
Yes.
where now the Gila River is.
That's not in Tennessee, but go ahead.
Is it like on the water or something? Like part of the town on one part of the water and one town on the other? Like if you look at the dock closely, it looks like it's directly in the Nile River.
Well, yes, but the thing is because it's a map, the Nile, well, two things. The Nile River is probably not much wider than that if you looked at it from an airplane. Plus the Nile River, at that point it's down low, and so it had lots of little tributaries that ran around. I'm sure that Memphis existed on both sides of that river. Yeah. Yes. Yes. Any other thoughts about that?
The young child lives near the Salt River, so he can't understand.
You can't understand. It's better that than the Gila River, right? So anyway, describe what happened in the story. And certainly we talked about the fact that there's no indication that Abram was led by God to go to Egypt. So and equally, there's no indication that God gave Abram the idea of introducing Sarah as his sister. I mean, that doesn't seem like something God would do anyway, quite frankly, right? But so he does that, and so what happens? Sure enough, they recognize that, my gosh, she is pretty good looking, but rather than try to take them, whoever did this, for himself, he tells Pharaoh about her, and Pharaoh's always on the lookout for good-looking women, I guess. And so basically, Pharaoh decides to buy this guy's sister, Abram's sister, and does so, paying Abram, a fair amount of cash for this whole thing. Now, needless to say, we know, we can make a really good case. Abram was definitely in love with Sarah. So this obviously must have driven him nuts. This is something he didn't foresee, So how did God protect Abram from what's obviously a horrible situation? You go ahead with your question. Okay. Well, I can't because you have the microphone. So nobody can answer my question. Why don't you answer it? What did God do to protect Abraham from the situation that he got himself into? You know? Can you tell from reading the story? I bet you your dad can give you a hint.
I'm trying. Like,
Verse 17 is the hint.
he plagued Pharaoh with basically some kind of disease.
Yep. So basically, Pharaoh, the story is a lot of different things. It's some horrible skin disease like boils or something. And Pharaoh, being the smart guy that he is, says, we all came down with this about the same time this lady came in here. What do you suppose the connection is, right? So he puts two and two together, not being the dummy that he is, and so he confronts Abram. And that's an interesting thing. He confronts Abram, and what does he say? Verse 18, so Pharaoh summoned Abram. What have you done to me? He said. Why didn't you tell me she was your wife? Why'd you say she is my sister so that I took her for my wife? Then he says, now then, go. So take your wife and get out of here so that I don't have this plague anymore.
So this Pharaoh doesn't take 10 things to let him know that you should let him go?
He's a smarter Pharaoh. Yeah.
Okay.
Would you forget the question? What? Okay. Well, you can think again.
This is so fun. Because this is kind of like a preview of Abram's descendants, who's Abram, who will become Abraham,
Yeah.
leaving Egypt and going with more than what they came in with.
Yeah.
Where Pharaoh, to stop the plague, say, go, get out of here.
Yeah.
And take
Yeah.
those who are
Yeah,
with
yeah,
you.
Yeah. Yeah.
and
You,
everything
you
else.
guys you're killing us here. Just go. Just
Get out of here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Get out of here. Come on.
Yeah.
Come on, leave.
Yeah. So it says that he take her and go, and Pharaoh gave orders about Abram and his men, and they sent him away on his way with his wife and everything he had. So in other words, Pharaoh had already paid him big bucks for his good-looking wife, and he gives him his wife back. I mean, in fairness to Pharaoh, he didn't think it was his wife, but he gives her back, and says, take all that other stuff and just go.
Third time's a charm.
Yeah.
So basically, he didn't even ask Abraham
Abram. Yeah.
for anything back. He just
Nope.
wanted them to leave because he doesn't want any. Because he'd rather have no sickness than all his valuables and the stuff that he gave away.
Yep.
Because what if I'm just saying a what if. Like, what if something bad happened and those were the only flock that he would have had that would survive? Now he doesn't have them, and it's going to be worse.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple things there. That's a good point. One thing, well, two or three things. One thing that says is Pharaoh wasn't too concerned about money, right? That's one thing that says. Another thing it says is he must wonder what kind of a guy this Abram is that he can cause plagues to come on him, like this. If it's his God that's doing this, then maybe I better be a little bit careful with that, which is probably really what the lesson was supposed to be for him, right?
I think it was a very serious plague, too. It wasn't there's a little bit of a problem here. It was a very,
Yeah, I know.
they were highly motivated
Yeah,
to do something.
that was what I was going to say. Another one is that it could just be that he was really, really beside himself with whatever it was that he was going through in terms of the plague. So did you have something, Mark? Polly does.
I was trying to find an article that I had came across one time, but I find it very interesting. And I first found this through when we were just studying of the heavens. And I had came across an article talking about how the Chaldeans, I'm not quite sure how you're pronouncing that, were extremely knowledgeable in the heavens and
Yes.
keeping track of the patterns. They were more than brilliant mathematicians.
Yep.
And they had preserved the knowledge of the heavens through this mathematical computations that later we know as trigonometry and more of the so advanced math that goes beyond me. But I find it interesting that in coming across, looking at some of this, they credit Abram with being a very distinct mathematician and astronomer that proved that the heavens and the sun and the moon and the land and the sea all worked in harmony together. And his thought was these cannot be independent, free-thinking gods as you are worshiping them that make up their own mind. They are all connected together, which proves that there is one God, one creator that orchestrates and commands each of these at his command. And that is what set him apart in, do I say Chaldean or Chaldean?
It's Chaldean, I've been
Okay,
told.
Chaldean.
Yeah.
This is what set him apart from the other Chaldeans, is because he stood in opposition to some of the other mathematicians and astronomers
Yeah.
who were proclaiming many gods and said, no, there is one God that is orchestrating all of these things together. And anyway, so it wouldn't take much if you looked it up. I'm sure you could find it in many different areas on the internet.
That's very interesting. It makes sense. It makes a lot of sense.
It makes sense why he took him out and showed him the heavens
Yeah,
too.
yeah.
It's something he was already very familiar with.
Yeah, absolutely. It absolutely does that. Okay. Well, it also is a good indication for why you can know that there's only one God without just as an item of faith. it does make sense.
There's quite a few indications possibly that Abram was following God by the stars, because he told him to look at the stars for one thing.
Yes.
Also, later on, the Star of Bethlehem led the children.
Yep.
So possibly he may not have spoken audibly to him
Yep.
in guiding and leading him all through here. But
That's a very good point. That's a very good point.
It was a precursor to the Magi then?
Yeah, well, the point is he could, I mean, I really like the idea that for the past, at this point in time, for the past almost 2,000 years, God was teaching his chosen ones how to read about him, to know about him through the heavens. And they, like I say, without TV and streetlights, they could spend a lot of time looking at all this kind of stuff. So it could very well be that Abram was using what he thought he knew, what he had learned, and figured out answers to things, and that's fine. I think that makes good sense. Yes, sir.
I'm not really talking about any of Abraham,
Okay.
but I'm knowing the ark of Noah had never been obedient to Yahweh. If there was no one else, basically all humans would have been wiped away from the face of the earth. And if Yahweh was never going to make any more humans, basically we would have never been made if Noah hadn't been obedient.
Well, I've got a good thought for you, and it's in the book of Esther. Because you have to go read the story of Esther, but Esther is being encouraged by her uncle to go tell the king about this plot to kill all the Jews. And her uncle says to her, if you don't do this, God will raise somebody else up to do it. But who knows but what you were born for such a time as this? And I think that's exactly what he would have said to Noah. He says, if you don't do this, I'll figure some other way to get it done. But that's exactly why you're here, is to do this. What you say is true, but God wasn't going to let that happen. That's fine. I like it when you just say. We're kind of at a bad spot here because we're at the end of a chapter, but I don't want to quit yet. So let's read chapter 13. At least get started on it, then we'll come back and finish it next week, if that's okay. Someone want to read chapter 13? Oh, okay. That's nice of you to share. That's a good thing.
Good young man. Thank you. I'm going to read from 13 to what?
Just go ahead and finish. It's not a very long chapter.
Okay.
It's got 18 verses.
All right. So Abram went up from Egypt to the Negev, he and his wife and all that belonged to him, and Lot with him. Now Abram was very rich in livestock, in silver, and in gold. He went on his journey from the Negev as far as Bethel, to a place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Ai, to the place of the altar which he had made there formerly. And there Abram called on the name of the Lord. Now Lot, who went with Abram, also had flocks and herds and tents, and the land could not sustain them while dwelling together, for their possessions were so great that they were not able to remain together. And there was strife between the herdsmen of Abram's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. Now the Canaanite and the Perizzite were dwelling then in the land. So Abram said to Lot, please, let there be no strife between you and me, nor between my herdsmen and your herdsmen, for we are brothers. Is not the whole land before you? Please separate from me. If to the left, then I will go to the right, or if to the right, then I will go to the left. Lot lifted up his eyes and saw all the valley of the Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, as you go to Zoar. So Lot chose for himself all the valley of the Jordan, and Lot journeyed eastward. And thus they separated from each other. Abram settled in the land of Canaan, while Lot settled in the cities of the valley and moved his tents as far as Sodom. Now the men of Sodom were wicked exceedingly and sinners against the Lord. And the Lord said to Abram, after Lot had separated from him, now lift up your eyes and look from the place where you are, northward and southward and eastward and westward. For all the land which you see, I will give to you and to your descendants forever. I will make your descendants as the dust of the earth, so that if anyone can number the dust of the earth, then your descendants can also be numbered. Arise, walk around or walk about through the land, its length and breadth, for I will give it to you. Then Abram moved his tent and came and dwelled by the oaks of Mamre, which are in Hebron. And there he built an altar to the Lord.
Great. Well, like I say, we're going to spend some time on this next week too, but let's talk about it now as well. So they leave Egypt a lot richer, right? And they had to head back home, so to speak. Now it says they went to Negev, so they left from here, so they went back across over here. This is the Negev right in here. And they went up, and it said they went, what does it say? They went back to the place between Bethel and Ai, where he had been earlier. So they went up through Beersheba and Hebron, and this little bird that wasn't known in Jerusalem, and there's Bethel. Bethel and Ai are just a stone's throw apart. One's east of the other. And so that's where he started when he first came into the land. So they went back up there. And then it goes on to this next thing and says he built an altar. I actually used the same altar. Lot, who was moving around with Abram, had flocks and herds, and he was rich too, right? And the herdsmen began to fight and argue with one another. So in verse 8, Abram says to Lot, there's no need for us to quarrel, or for your herdsmen to quarrel with mine. We're all in this together. Is not the whole land before us? So let's part company. If you want to go to the left, I'll go to the right. If you go to the right, I'll go to the left, right? So I figure they must have been somewhere around on this little hilltop up in here, because Lot looks down and he sees the Jordan Valley. Now the Jordan River runs right down here, and he looks at the valley here and he says, he looked up and saw the whole plain of the Jordan as was well watered, like the garden of Yahweh, like the land of Egypt toward Zoar. And this was before Yahweh had destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, typically most people think Sodom and Gomorrah were down here at the south end of the Dead Sea. So this whole area here would have been, according to this, well watered and green. So they probably had diverted some of the Jordan River water to come around and then watered things around in there. Certainly, maybe he was looking up here and saw that this was pretty nice too. I don't know. But anyway, that's where they were looking. Just a minute. And so they parted. Which one did Lot choose? What? Jordan. Beg your pardon, is that what you said? What'd you say? He chose, okay. He went to the Jordan. He chose to come down here. Now, if Sodom and Gomorrah aren't shown, but if they were here, what it says, Lot parted from him. No, verse 12. Abram lived in the land of Canaan, while Lot lived among the cities of the plain and pitched his tents near Sodom. Okay? So, Abram stayed up here. Actually, it says Abram went to Hebron, stayed in Hebron, and then Lot went down here and stayed at Sodom. And you can see from one to the other. That's a fun little drive to drive back and forth from down here at the shore of the Dead Sea, which is like 1,000 feet below sea level, up some pretty nice hairpin turns to get up in here where you get to a couple of thousand feet above sea level, and it's but there's no way that's what you call well-watered and green. I mean, it looks worse than what we have out here south of Phoenix. But anyway, that's what happened. See, we got questions. Go ahead, you ask your question first.
This is just my thought. I don't mean to be like any rude about what this says.
Uh-huh.
And they said when it says Lot looked and saw that there were plenty of resources, to me it sounded like in his mind he was kind of being like greedy because he was like, hey, everything's over there. Because in the valley, when he went over there, it kind of looks like you have to walk a fair way to get to the water. But over there, you basically have water right there. So to me, I'm not trying to be rude. That it just looks like he was probably trying to be a little lazy and greedy in his mind for that minute. That's why he chose that way.
I think that's fair. I think what Lot did, I mean, Abram gave him the choice. Abram says, here, right or left? And Lot looks over here and he says, well, the right looks a lot better. I'll take that. That's what he did.
So basically he's being greedy because he's taking the better way.
Sure.
That's what he thinks.
Sure. Mm-hmm. I think that's probably fair.
Along those lines, and I don't remember where I read this, it's a long time ago, that culturally, if Abram was older than Lot, Lot should have responded back and deferred to his older cousin or brother.
Yep.
And said, you know, you're the one, you choose.
You're my senior, yeah.
You're my senior, you choose the land for yourself. But he didn't do that.
Yeah.
And so, you know, like you said, he chose for
He just-
himself
well, yeah.
without stopping to think about it. So.
Yep. Matthew's got something there.
So, do you think the Dead Sea was not as dead back then? I mean,
Well, I'll tell you what, it clearly says, although it's in parentheses, it says at the end of verse 14, I guess it is, no, end of verse 10, this was before Yahweh had destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, and I'm sure the landscape looked a lot different then than it does now. So yeah, I think there's a good case to be drawn for the fact that it was probably a fairly productive looking area, which it is definitely not now. Mm-hmm.
The fishing was better.
This is by the way, I've told that story a bunch of times about how we used to live here and we'd drive up to Amman, and so we'd drive up this valley here and then we'd come up this side, and right there is a little town called Zoar. It's still there. You can go to it.
It's interesting that it talks about it was watered like the garden of, like God's garden, Yahweh's garden.
Yeah. So I think the Dead Sea wasn't quite as dead, might be the good way to put it. It's pretty darn dead now. One more, then we'll quit.
This goes way back to the beginning. I just had a thought.
Okay.
It kind of about what do you call it? The Garden of Eden.
Yep.
If Yahweh didn't want anyone to go to the gardens because they could eat of the tree of life.
That's right.
And live forever unless they got killed or something. He could have just let them in and got rid of what he didn't want them to have. That's why I'm wondering why he lives there unknown where no one knows where it is, and didn't just take stuff out that needed to be taken out and let people in.
Well, that's a good question. I'll noodle on that. We'll think about it for the coming week. Would somebody like to close us in prayer? I always tend to. You would? Would you do that? Okay, let you close us in prayer.
Thanks, Yahweh, for giving us another day to learn and to explain what we do and what we know. We always love you. We never hate you. We sin, but we repent. We never, ever want to go to hell and not be with you. We want to love you and know you. We want to know as much as we can for us all the rest of our lives. We love you, Yahweh. In Yeshua's name I pray. Amen.
Amen. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's been a good time. We'll do the same thing next week. Thanks for watching on television.
Thanks, Jerry.